the recognition of the existence of environmental problems and the construction of a global environmental governance system constitute the third factor important to the institutionalization of the environmental policy. The rise of the environmental concern occurred basically between the late 1960s and the early 70s. Regarding the civil society, many of the best known international environmental organizations were created around this time. For instance, Friends of the Earth was founded in 1969. Greenpeace was founded in 1972. Political parties dedicated to the green issues. The first green parties were created in Tasmania, Australia, and in New Zealand, both in 1972. And the best known green party of all, Die Grünen, the German Greens, they held their first party congress in 1980. And 3 years after, they made a huge breakthrough in the federal German elections in 1983, winning 5% of the vote and 27 seats in the Bundestag. Regarding national governments, the emergence of the environmental policy as a distinct realm of government action and authority occurred in parallel across nearly all industrial democracies. And it also occurred in many industrializing countries, in many developing countries. Between 1967 and 1976, around 24 countries created a national environmental agency or a ministry, and most enacted a national framework law. For instance, the United States were one of the first. They enacted a series of major environmental laws, beginning with the National Environmental Policy Act in 1969 and the Clean Air Act in 1970, and they continued with laws regarding water pollution, drinking air quality, endangered species, forest management, and so on. Their Federal Environmental Protection Agency was also created in 1970 to administer the law and protect public health and the environment. With respect to the global governance system, we have some important events, 2 international conferences, and some important documents. I'm referring to the Stockholm Conference in 1972, the 1992 Rio Conference, and to the Brundtland Report, published in 1987. Let's discuss each of them. In 1972, the United Nations held the first conference on the human environment, also known as Stockholm Conference. It was the first significant meeting of 113 countries organized by the United Nations on this subject, and more than 400 government and non-government institutions participated also in place. This conference addressed issues mainly related to industrial pollution on one hand and natural resources, untouched areas on the other hand. For the first time, the world directed its attention to these issues related to global population growth, to economic growth, to atmospheric pollution. It was really a breakthrough event. There was a growing opposition between the so-called developed countries and the developing countries. The developed countries began their arguments defending an immediate reduction in the pace of industrialization due to environmental degradation. But the second group, the developing countries, they rejected to assume commitments limiting their ability to enrich, and, as they argued, limiting their ability to guarantee adequate quality of life to their populations. But during the conversations and negotiations, their opinion changed. The Stockholm Conference did not adopt any binding legal document, but it generated many important steps. For instance, a first declaration on the human development was signed in June 6th of 72. It is the first document of international law to connect human rights and the environmental issues. It is considered the beginning of the modern international environmental law. Furthermore, the conference played an essential role in inserting environmental problems among the priorities of governments and in the awareness of the populations around the world. The preparatory process also triggered 4 new global treaties: the 72 World Heritage Convention, the 72 London Dumping Convention, the 73 Endangered Species Convention, and the 79 Migratory Species Convention. It also led to the establishment of the United Nations Environment Program, UNEP, as the first global intergovernmental institution in this field, which in turn produced more than 30 multilateral, global and regional legal agreements over the following 2 decades. And the UNEP also generated one of the most influential and enduring international soft law agreements. 1 decade after, it was created, in 1983, the World Commission on Environment and Development, also by the United Nations. And this commission was chaired by Gro Harlem Brundtland. The goals of this commission were to re-examine critical questions regarding the environment and reformulate proposals, provide new forms of international cooperation, and give to individuals, to organizations, to companies, institutes, and governments a greater understanding of the environmental problems, encouraging them to a more firm attitude. Well, this commission worked, and in 1987, they recommended the creation of a new Universal Declaration on the Environmental Protection and Sustainable Development. It was the Brundtland Report. This document was presented as a proposal to integrate the environmental issues to economic development, emerging not only a new term, but a new way of progressing. And to achieve this, the government should adopt the following measures: limit population growth, guarantee long-term food, preserve biodiversity and ecosystems, reduce energy consumption, promote the development of technologies that allow the use of renewable energy sources, increase industrial production in non-industrialized countries based on ecologically adapted technologies, control urbanization, and at the international level, the report suggested that development organizations should adopt a sustainable development strategy, and the international community should protect supranational ecosystems as the Antarctica, the oceans, or the space, and wars should be stopped, and the UN should implement a sustainable development program. As we see, the proposals enlarged the international agenda compared to the 72 Stockholm Conference. And finally, in 1992, a second international meeting promoted by the United Nations, the Conference on Environment and Development, was held in Rio de Janeiro. This conference addressed the so-called global environmental problems. And the conference brought together political leaders, diplomats, scientists, representatives of the media, and representatives of non-governmental organizations from 179 countries. This conference generated several global environmental agreements on many themes, such as the Rio Declaration on Environment and Development, the Statement of Forest Principles, the Agenda 21, the Convention on Biological Diversity, and the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change. These agreements were transformed in each country into national regulations during the following years. So, dear students, during 20 years, many changes occurred. Global agreements and national regulations were set up. Civil society gained voice through civil environmental organizations, as well domestic as well transnational ones. And in the political arena, green parties imposed the presence of environmental challenges in the political agenda.